Having recently completed both the world's most extensive system of expressways and the planet's longest high-speed rail network, China is now looking beyond its borders for opportunities to keep building. President Xi Jinping announced at a recent summit that Beijing has sealed mega-project deals with 65 countries throughout Eurasia and Africa to construct ports, power stations, rail lines, roads, and all the tunnels and bridges needed to connect them back to mainland China. At a total cost of over $1 trillion, the One Belt, One Road initiative is unprecedented in size and scope. So is the bold funding mechanism. China will use its large, state-run banks to provide most of the financing. A risky move when you consider how few of the nations in the OBOR could afford something like this on their own. Oh, say the leaders of economically challenged underdeveloped Laos, Yemen, or Ethiopia, or the blood-soaked regime of Bashar al-Assad in war-ravaged Syria. You want to loan us billions of dollars to build some cool stuff in our countries? Of course, why not? China is hard selling the project as a way to boost its westward connections, an update of the Silk Road trade route that played a significant role in developing China and the rest of the region 1,000 years ago. But many analysts see this comparison as little more than a marketing pitch.
Charles, is the real point of this East Wind service then simply to boost China's westwards connections?
Well, I wouldn't say simply to boost China's westward connections, but I totally agree with Charles that it's a PR stunt. To call it the Silk Road, that's really brilliant, evocative of romantic camel travels in the past. You know, when you have these lovely silks and trade and so forth. And it's good because look at all the headlines it has been getting. But in practical terms, it's early days yet.
Aside from the lessons China learned from its own recent infrastructure boom, Beijing is also drawing inspiration from the American Marshall Plan, which financed the rebuilding of Western Europe after it was decimated during the Second World War. That program was worth the equivalent of $130 billion in today's dollars and ensured the US had reliable export markets for the manufactured goods and machinery its growing economy had become dependent on producing. China's modern version, first announced in 2013, is the signature initiative of President Xi Jinping. Several projects have already been completed. Earlier this year, London became the 15th European city connected directly to China through an ever-expanding global rail system, meaning freight trains loaded with goods can now arrive after a 12,000-kilometer journey all the way from the east coast of the landmass. And at a cost of $4 billion, China also just completed Africa's first transnational electric railway, which runs 466 miles from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. Chinese companies designed the system, built the line, and supplied the train cars. The many other projects under the OBOR umbrella include a $6 billion 260-mile railway connecting 8 Asian countries, desperately needed power plants to address Pakistan's chronic electricity shortage, part of a larger $46 billion investment by China in Pakistan aimed at offsetting the American and Japanese-backed building boom happening in neighboring India, China and Pakistan's mutual rival. Train lines will connect Budapest and Belgrade, Serbia, providing another artery for Chinese goods to reach Europe after arriving in a Chinese-owned port in Greece. And, in a move that adds prestige to OBOR, China is financing more than a third of the $23.7 billion cost of the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant in southwest England. Part of the challenge in analyzing whether this building boom is ultimately good for the world is its sheer complexity. Nothing like this has ever been done before in human history. Yes, providing underdeveloped countries a chance to have better transportation infrastructure or cleaner power plants is a good thing. But by funding infrastructure that's designed to enhance commerce and trade, instead of basic services many of these countries need more, like clean drinking water, affordable housing, and better education, China's motives seem to favor the wealthy elite business class. Here are some other major factors that explain why China is undertaking a project of this magnitude. The Communist Party has staked its reputation on non-stop economic growth. Since they hold all the power, the Chinese people expect them to deliver. But with its domestic megaproject boom nearing completion, China must find new buyers for all the steel, cement, and construction machinery its economy produces, or many of its factories could grind to a halt. It is decided the solution is One Belt, One Road, but lending hundreds of billions of dollars to many countries with weak credit ratings and unstable political systems is very risky, which reveals an underlying sense you get when you look closely at One Belt, One Road, China's increasing desperation. The country's national debt is already very high, but borrowing continues to accelerate at historic levels as state-owned banks loan more and more money to state-owned companies. The prime example of the risks associated with the tightrope the Communist Party is trying to walk was the government's bailout issued during China's recent stock market collapse. That crisis was caused by the same sense of impatience that's driving OBOR, the party's need to feed the insatiable economic growth monster. Using its powerful propaganda machine, Beijing urged its own people to invest their savings heavily in its immature, unstable market, causing inexperienced citizens to treat investments in companies like bets at a casino, creating a huge bubble that, naturally, burst. The government then suspended trading for a while and pumped billions into the system to avoid a total collapse. So really, when you step back, the core motivation for One Belt, One Road boils down to the Communist Party's need to buy itself more time in order to come up with its next scheme to prop up the economy. Because when it inevitably slows down, which it's already starting to do, the party's promise to deliver a fantastic economic dream world will have been proven false for everyone in China but the elites. The silver lining is that many of the ventures China has undertaken will pay long-term dividends, like building up its high-tech manufacturing center, with the anticipation that when OBOR's transportation networks are complete, it will be ready to use them to deliver higher-cost goods, like iPhones, drones, and green energy technologies to the rest of the world. The other major motivating factor here is the unmistakable opportunity to gain even power status with the United States in Asia. The election of Donald Trump, and then his decision to walk away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal that would have hurt China, are massive geopolitical mistakes, completely unforced errors that China intends to take full advantage of. When it first announced the OBOR back in 2013, Barack Obama had just begun his second term, and the US pivot to Asia was in full force. With rivals like Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam challenging China's efforts to control maritime trade routes, it was clear China was being hemmed in on its eastern flank. Despite the election of Trump, this is still true. So by instead turning to the vast land mass to the west for new opportunities, China minimizes its reliance on maritime trade routes that could be cut off in the event of a destabilizing military conflict. At the end of the day, China is all about that business. It doesn't matter if you're a democracy, a dictatorship, or a failed state, China wants to work with you. But this willingness to embrace some of the world's more unsavory characters could backfire. Just look at who Xi is sitting next to at the OBOR summit: Russia's Vladimir Putin and Turkey's Erdogan, two men who look more and more like dictators clinging to power with each passing day. That's not a good look for China, and it reminds us that the Communist Party is even less transparent. But in a world where the President of the United States is a bumbling fool, these partnerships create much less of an image problem now than they would have just a few months ago when the widely admired Barack Obama was leading the free world. If you ask the Chinese, the OBOR is all about peace, an embrace of the concept of co-opetition. A generation ago, it was unthinkable for a country to invest billions of dollars on infrastructure in another country. But in our hyper-globalized world, dominated by interconnected markets, it may become the norm, especially when we consider the intangible benefits. Greater economic interdependence lowers the risk that groups of countries will want to fight with other groups of countries, many of whom are bound together by military alliances. Every one of these projects increases China's soft power, giving Beijing more and more leverage in any future negotiation or military conflict. The many foreign seaports it will build and manage for the next half-century will be particularly valuable chess pieces. It's understandable that Chinese policymakers are romanticizing One Belt, One Road as a crowning achievement for their nation, further recognition that it has gained its former status as a great civilization that deserves recognition around the world. But the reality is that it still has a long way to go. Combined, the following factors may weaken the optimistic sales pitches being made to foreign officials. A recent Oxford Business School study argued that half of Chinese domestic megaprojects actually destroyed, not generated, economic value. A few of China's previous efforts to build megaprojects in foreign countries, like the A2 motorway in Poland, failed miserably. Landowners and their representatives in the national assemblies of host countries are pushing back hard against attempts to take away their land. And public demonstrations against some of the projects are beginning to take root and spread. Another dose of reality that should sober Beijing is that, after analyzing China's over-leveraged financial position, its credit rating was just downgraded by a major agency, whose analysts concluded that its borrowing is raising red flags and its economic growth will continue to slow down. Of course, none of these speed bumps is going to stop the Communist Party from attempting to execute their Great Leap. They are committed 100% to embracing a fundamental history lesson, one we were all reminded of by Brexit's improbable win and the unlikely ascendance of Donald Trump, that fortune favors the bold, at least in the short run. Thanks for watching.